Hello everyone, it's Julie from sproutsandstems.com here, and today's video is going to be houseplant basics for beginners. I've got my spider plant Bonnie here for some decoration, but this is going to be a general guide. I've done a lot of species specific guides, but in this video I'm going to touch on the very basic care tips in each aspect of plant care, so what beginners need to know to get started with houseplants. So really quick, please take 2 seconds to subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss any new planty content from me. I want to try to hit 4,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so that would really help me out, and thank you if you've already subscribed. And check out my description for links to exclusive content and also links to anything I mention in my videos. Okay, and now we'll get started with the houseplant tips for beginners. As I mentioned, this is going to be a general care tips video, and obviously every plant is different. Some plants are trickier than others, but these tips will be good for most of your common houseplants. For the light and the water section that I'm going to talk about now, these are probably going to be the longest sections because they tend to confuse beginners the most, I think. So just bear with me, and I have chapters as usual, so you can skip through if you want. Even though there's plants, snake plants, for example, that are advertised as liking the dark, that really just means that they can tolerate the dark better than others. At the end of the day, plants want light. They need light to photosynthesize, so no plant is going to quote unquote thrive in a dark corner. So the more light, the better. Bright and direct light typically is best. Medium light is okay too. Direct light, you want to be careful with that too much and it can burn your plant's leaves. So what is indirect light versus direct light? Okay, so this tidbit is from Daryl from Houseplant Journal. I love his content, and he was one of the first plant influencers that I started following years ago. I might not get this quote like perfect, but he says that direct light is when a plant can see the sun, when it can see the sky outside and it can see the sun in the sky. And indirect light is when a plant has the widest possible view of the sky but without seeing any sun. So the plant is getting plenty of sky, but the sun's rays are not shining directly on the plant. I always thought that was a helpful piece of knowledge that he shares. So long story short with light, bright indirect light is typically best for your plants. So water, another confusing thing, you do not want to water on a set schedule. Are you watering once a week on every Sunday at noon, like clockwork? Are you doing that? Well, stop. Stop it right now. You don't want to water on a set schedule. It's okay to have that set schedule to check in with your plants, but ultimately you only want to water when your plant needs it. So spider plants, for example, like to totally dry out. I can check my plant once a week, taking my finger, and I can feel around the soil. It's still wet. I'm not going to water it until I feel that it's totally dry. And you might need to stick your finger down into the soil a little bit just so you could feel, is it just the surface that's dry? Is it still wet down below? So it's very important if you have a plant where maybe online you saw water when the top inch of the soil is dry. Well, then it should still be dry on top, but then a little bit wet when you stick your finger down in the soil. And then you know that you can water again. Bottom line, do not water on a set schedule without feeling the soil first. Now, when it comes to humidity for plants, it's not something that you need to worry about as a beginner, but I'll just touch on it briefly. So many common house plants, not all of them, but many, like this big Monstera cuttings I have over here. They come from humid areas, humid jungle, rainforest, tropical climates. So that means that they enjoy humidity. They will do well in high humidity. If it's too dry, like if it's wintertime and your heat is on and the air is blasting, you might notice some crispy tips on those plants. But overall, it's not something that really is going to affect your plant that much. It's kind of like if you have a humid environment for your plants, they'll most likely enjoy that. And if not, don't worry about it. Now, for potting mix, plants don't want to be sitting in a soaking, wet, saturated, dripping, excess water pot. You should always use a well-draining mix, but with that, you can have varying degrees of well-draining. So like a cactus, for example, wants extremely well-drained potting mix. Like I just mentioned, a monstera, a more jungly type plant, wants something that's well-draining, so it's not going to stay soaking wet and saturated, but it still has some elements that are going to hold on to a little bit of moisture so that it's not totally bone dry right away. Because remember how I said those humid environment, tropical plants, they don't really want to be totally 100% dry. With all that said, the easiest thing you can do is to just buy a bag of potting mix for what you need. If you have a cactus or succulent, I would just buy a cactus and succulent mix. For any other common houseplants like spider plants, monsteras, pothos, philodendron, whatever, a regular bag of indoor plant potting mix is going to be totally fine. Just keep it simple. And now for pots and repotting. For pots, you definitely want to drainage hole. Yes, there are a lot of pretty ceramic pots out there that you might want to use that don't have a drainage hole. If that's the case, I recommend potting it in a pot that has a drainage hole and then putting that in the pretty pot as a cache pot. I'd also recommend using a terracotta pot instead of plastic as a beginner because terracotta pots dry out quickly. They're not going to retain all this water because plastic, it's not porous. The water isn't going to go anywhere else but out the bottom or eventually dry from the top. So I recommend clay terracotta pots to start with. And you also want to choose a pot that's an appropriate size for your plant. I know it might make sense to, if you have a small plant, get a bigger pot because it'll grow into that pot. But what that actually will do is overwater your plant because all of that extra soil is going to hold so much water. For a little plant with a small root system, it's going to stay wet for so long and it's going to overwater and kill your plant. So choose an appropriate size pot. And then when you repot, just go one size up, maybe two sizes up if it's a big plant. And last but not least, for fertilizing, my favorite fertilizer is Jack's Classic Fertilizer. It's just a balanced all-purpose one. I'll link it in the description. And you get so much in one container and literally you'll be passing it down for generations in your family. I would say that you don't even need to worry about fertilizer as a beginner. Your plants are still going to grow without it. But if you want to start getting into fertilizing, just choose just a regular all-purpose fertilizer, such as the one I mentioned, and just start with fertilizing once a month. Follow the instructions on the container. It'll say like, sorry, my voice is starting to go. It'll say use like such and such teaspoons or whatever per gallon of water. Follow the instructions for the amount, but just in terms of frequency, start with just once a month because over fertilizing is also an easy way to damage a plant. So you want to be careful with that. And once a month will be a good way to get started and give your plants a nice little boost. So that is it. I hope this basic plant care tips for beginners guide was helpful. Maybe for some of you, even if you're not a total beginner, maybe you got something out of it. Please subscribe to my channel once again. Thank you so much for that. And I will see you guys next time.